We live in a world, whether you're looking at television or whether you're looking at your own family, where oftentimes there are broken relationships in marriages. Where is Jesus in all of this, and how can we find a healing? Hi, my name is Father Mike Manning. I'm a Catholic priest. It's an honor to be with you. You are going to enjoy, well, you're going to be challenged and you're going to be enriched by today's program. We all know that there's an awful lot of struggle with marriage. Marriage is a tough reality in many ways, and yet it can be a beautiful blessing. But what do we do when everything seems to fall apart in a marriage relationship? How can we bring healing? How can we bring new life to that? We're going to be able to talk with an expert in that. Father David, God bless you. Thank you so much for coming and being with us today. Father Mike. I've been looking for this for a long time. You and I both know that as priests, we deal with a lot of brokenness in people's lives as husbands and wives, and in the struggle of how do they go on with their life after a divorce or a breakup. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about your relationship with Christ, and so that we can maybe understand you a little bit. You're a holy priest, and sometimes that can kind of put you on a pedestal. Tell us, how did your experience of Christ get started, and what was going on?
Sure. I'm the oldest of 4 children, and I'm a cradle Catholic, so my parents were always involved in the Catholic Church. And one of their priorities was to send us to Catholic schools. So all 4 of us went for 12 years to Catholic schools.
Hello, okay.
That's why we didn't have any new cars. And during that time, the priests and the nuns and the teachers would often say, David, you should be a priest, think about the seminary. And sometimes I said yes, sometimes I said, no, I want to be center fielder for the Cleveland Indians, or something that kids dream about. Leaving high school, the principal, a priest, asked me to join the religious order. And I said, no, I'm going to go to college and be an engineer. I'll get married and I'll go to church on Sunday, that's enough. During 1 year of college at Harvey Mudd studying engineering, I fell in with a Protestant group, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. Only 5 Catholics out of about 120 people would go to their meetings. And I went to their Bible studies, their prayer meetings. And on Sundays, they went to their churches and I went to Mass. But during one of their Bible studies, it got me thinking about maybe God is calling me to the seminary and to the priesthood through all these other people. And so I made the call. I went to the seminary and just loved the studies, loved the environment, the prayers, the spirituality. And as time went by, I kind of heard God calling me to the priesthood through other people. Saying, you know, David, you can do this, you do these things well.
Those in words of encouragement, I think we both can relate to that. Somebody says, I think you'd be good at that. And that's all it takes, doesn't it?
That's all it took to get in and to continue as well.
Yes, yes. You've been a priest for how long?
I've been a priest for almost 19 years now.
19 years.
The Diocese of San Bernardino.
Now you work almost exclusively right now, although you're working in a parish, and it's a joy every once in a while to get to your gorgeous parish, St. Francis, in Yucaipa. But one of your main concentrations has been dealing with this situation of struggling marriages and trying to bring healing and trying to bring hope in a lot of situations. How did you get involved in that?
The ministry, as far as being a canon lawyer, was something that the bishop invited me to go and study.
What does that mean, a canon lawyer?
Canon lawyer is someone who knows canon law, the church law, the law of the church.
Okay, so the Catholic Church has a book of laws that kind of give direction so that people don't bump into each other too many times.
Correct, correct.
And you did your study? Did you have to go to Rome to do that?
I did. I studied for 2 years in Rome. The bishop sent me there, and I came back in 2001 working mostly as a judge in the marriage tribunal. That's kind of the bulk of the work of a canon lawyer. Is our marriage annulments.
A marriage annulments, okay. Would you share with me what makes a successful marriage? You're dealing with couples and you're dealing with paperwork and talking with people day in and day out. What would you say to someone to say, this is really going to be making your marriage a success?
Well, on the other side of annulments, of course, I do marriage preparation for young couples in the parishes as well. I think some of the keys are a good solid foundation, especially Christian values, if you share those values about what marriage is about or what's involved in a Christian marriage.
And what Christian values kind of rise to the top?
You know, faithfulness to one another, permanence in marriage, openness to life, a kindness to one another as well. I see friendship also as being very important and kind of foundational, especially for the woman. When the friendship goes in the marriage, her heart's not there anymore, and it's hard to recover friendship for her in a marriage once it's gone, when she's no longer friends with her spouse. Some of those things in common are very important. And in the beginning, sometimes people don't realize the differences in religion or values, what that can create in a marriage, especially when you have children, and the idea of raising children and what faith will you raise them in. So some of those things to be talked about beforehand. Then I think also it's important to look at communication in marriage and sticking it out too. I think, like in all of our lives, there are seasons of marriage. You know, there are good times and bad cycles as well. And some of it is just going through those times, you know, surpassing mere feelings of love, but being loving in words and actions, no matter how I feel. You know, laying down my life for you. It's not what I get out of marriage, it's what I give to you in marriage.
Wow, wow.
Some of those attitudes, even prior to marriage, are important for making a successful marriage.
One of the things that bothers me a great deal is a couple will come up and say, oh, we've known each other for a month and 2 months. Father, will you marry us today? We're all ready to get married. And
no, I will not.
And no, you will not. And because I think there's really need for time, and there's need for investigation, and there's need to really understand what is, who are you and who am I, and how can the two of us be together for the rest of our lives in marriage. There's all kinds of factors. And you mentioned, oh, good old Paul with his coming up with, you know, patience. And I tell it at my weddings. Usually they want to pick when they ask for a reading in the thing. It's the Paul's letter to the Corinthians when he talks about love. And there's several things that I said, but listen, I said, if you could do these two things, if you could be patient and you could be kind, you probably are going to have a great deal of success. And that means this patience even in the times of the ups and the downs of the seasons of your life, you know. Wow. But let's get down to the struggle of many questions that we have, and it's the question of annulment. The possibility of saying a marriage has ended, and that perhaps we want to marry another person, you know, after marrying in the church. A process of annulment comes in. Am I correct in saying this?
That's correct, yes. A person would need an annulment before they can marry again in the church.
Marry again. The problem with this word annulment is that there's this red flag that seems to shine, that when we look at Matthew and we look at what Jesus has to say, he's rather clear about saying, if once you're married, you may not, and if you marry again, you're even committing adultery. How do you reconcile those words of Jesus with the idea of an annulment?
It's a good question, because in Matthew chapter 19, Jesus does say, you know, there is no divorce, marriage is forever. And so I look at it in a couple of areas. First, sometimes people call an annulment a Catholic divorce, and that's just a bad term for it. A divorce is a valid marriage broken up. An annulment says that the marriage was null, that is legally, because of some criteria, it never existed. And we even have the idea of annulments in civil marriage law. It's possible to annul a civil marriage.
Yes.
Based on conditions, it's a decision from a judge, says the children are not illegitimate, they're legitimate even from an annulled marriage. There are only certain conditions or grounds or criteria, and it says in civil law that the marriage never existed. Well, we have that similar idea in church law as well. So the idea for marriage is a sacrament made between the consent of two people, the husband and wife. And so their consent, they have to consent to Christian marriage and its values and ideas and essential properties. They have to consent to marriage forever, exclusive to one another. And if the consent of one or the other is defective, we would call it in some sense, based on certain criteria or grounds, then the marriage can be annulled. So when Jesus says there's no divorce, certainly we agree as Catholics, there's no divorce. But I think we would all agree that sometimes consent between parties may not be free. We can think of a shotgun wedding, put a shotgun in my back, and I'll say, I do, right?
Of course.
We can think of people who are crazy, who cannot, even if they want to, give themselves to another person in marriage. We can think of situations of people who are going to be abusive towards their spouse, or they know they're going to be unfaithful to their spouse, or they go into a marriage thinking, I don't want children, I don't want this to last forever. So there are certain things that affect the person's consent. And when the consent is not fully given to Christian marriage, then it may be grounds for an annulment.
Now, we're going to come back, because I'm curious to hear, what does that mean in terms of practicality? Who do you go to and what's involved in this? I like the examples that you gave, but stay tuned. We're going to try to find out if perhaps this is of interest to you or to someone that you love. What is the process? How do we get this going? Stay tuned, please. I really appreciate your giving the clarification that Jesus has said no divorce, but if there's a union with two people that is really not a marriage, because, well, I think of, for example, there might be a secret that someone had in their life that they never told someone else. Well, if you're not honest with the person you're going to be spending the rest of your life with, that's kind of like a basic problem that can go. And how many people are really psychologically and emotionally ready to bear the burden of what it means to be a married couple for the rest of their lives? Sometimes they're just not fortified with that. I might say, I love you and I'm attracted to you and we could be great in bed, but wow, am I really able to say beyond that there's something deeper going on in what we're saying? Okay, so I'm listening to you and I'm saying, okay, and what do I do? Where do I go and how would I get this process started? I'm curious about questions. I'm curious about how long, even in terms of cost. Is it going to cost me thousands of dollars to do something like that? Tell me a little bit about that.
It doesn't cost thousands of dollars or even anything. No one, sometimes there's a misconception that I can buy an annulment, right?
Yeah.
That if I spend enough money or I give enough money to the church, they'll give me an affirmative decision.
Well, we hear about some of the big stars, getting an annulment when you think, well, I guess they knew somebody and they had the money to be able to do it, yes.
Right, nothing can be further from the truth. Would that we can just buy them, it would be so much easier. But that's not the case at all. The place to go if you're looking for an annulment is going to your parish first, talking with either the priest there or a deacon, or there are trained lay people that help you go through the paperwork, answering some of the questions there to get the whole process started. On average, an annulment takes about 18 months on average, depending on how strong the case, the grounds may be, and witnesses who respond and things.
But now, okay, I come in and I say, okay, Father O'Shaughnessy, I'd like to have an annulment, and he's going to pass me on a form, is it?
Yes.
And what's in the form? What's there?
The majority or the bulk of the annulment is questions and answers. So we were looking at your consent and the consent that your ex-spouse gave as well. That's known to you and to God inside your heart. And the annulment process needs to bring it outside into what we'd call the external form. But the questions in the annulment talk about what's your family background like, what example did you receive of marriage, what was your religious upbringing like, you and your ex-spouse, how did you meet one another, what did you do for courtship, tell us about your intentions going into marriage, because again, marriage is made at the time of consent. Then of course there's a lot on the problems that may have happened in marriage as well, and a separation and final breakup. So it's kind of going through the history of the relationship.
One of the things that I find whenever I talk with someone and I'm encouraging them to say, well, why don't you try this process of annulment? 9 times out of 10, it's like, whoa, I don't want to get back into that again. The pain of what happened with the separation and the divorce. My word is, from my experience, and I hope you'd validate that even though it's painful, and you have to wait till you're ready, you can't do it until you're ready, but even if you're willing to go through the pain, it can be a great healing.
That's always our hope. Pope Francis, in his latest exhortation, talks a lot about reconciliation and healing, and we always hope that the annulment process is healing, It is painful. It's like, I make the analogy, it's picking open a scab.
I know, yeah.
And it hurts to pick it open, but you pick it open so that it heals better and more completely and fully. And there are many people who, with difficulty, answer very personal and private questions, but after they've gone through the process, say, I'm better now. I'm more able to forgive my spouse. I know myself better. I know the mistakes I made, and I won't do that again.
Yeah, but I've made a conscious decision in my mind. I know this marriage didn't work, and I feel completely convinced of this. Why do we got to come to the church and do this? Why is the church involved? Isn't my conscience enough?
Yes and no. Yes and no. And that's especially a question that non-Catholics ask, because even non-Catholics may need to do an annulment if they want to marry a Catholic in the Catholic Church. So it's especially difficult for them to understand, well, why does my marriage in Las Vegas or a Protestant church or on the beach, why does that have to be brought to the Catholic Church for an annulment? Ultimately, the Church teaches, our conscience is our guide, and we always have to follow our conscience. But it needs to be an informed conscience, and part of that is bringing a broken marriage out into the external forum to let the church, in a sense, view that and judge that.
Why can't I just feel good? What's the importance of the church in all of this?
The church, I think, very much as outside party, one who looks for the truth and seeks the truth, and who often validates your conscience, too, with the decision. Right? It's not that every annulment decision is an affirmative. Some are negative. Some people do marry validly. But the idea is I humbly present this before the church, and the church makes a judgment which I follow.
Well, one of the struggles is we live in a world of many people who are saying, I just want to have religion, I don't want to have church. But in many ways, if I'm committed to Jesus in my heart and I want to give myself to Jesus, I first do it in my heart. But I need to have a community that I experience that with. And if you grant that, the importance of not just being an individual Jesus and me person, then there's a certain sense of responsibility that I have to work through. And this is the neat thing, to believe that the Holy Spirit can work through the church and clarify and speak with authority and speak with justice and love to free me or to challenge me wherever I'm going. Does that make sense?
It does, and sometimes even as people say they want to just follow their conscience, once the church says affirmative on your annulment, they feel so much relieved as well.
Yeah, that's true.
And even before they bring it to the church, they have a hard time believing their conscience in some ways.
Now, is there, let's say a person is granted an annulment, one of the big questions in the back of their mind is, does that make my children bastards?
That's a very common question, even from non-Catholics. Sometimes think that, and no, not at all. Nothing could be further from the truth. Just like in civil law, a null marriage doesn't mean that the children are illegitimate. Certainly, there is a legal, valid civil marriage, civil union, and the children are there, right? There's no denying that they're there, and there's no covering over the fact that there were probably good times in the marriage as well. Yeah. It doesn't say it didn't exist. The marriage existed. It just wasn't legally valid. It was legally null because the criteria for consent weren't met, just like in a civil marriage annulment.
Yes. Tell me a little bit about this. A lot of times I run into people who their marriage breaks up, they get a civil divorce, and they're convinced that they may not receive communion because of this statement of Jesus about stay away from divorce, and they enter divorce. What do you say to someone like that? They're not remarrying with another person, but they're divorced. May they receive the sacraments and be part of the church?
They may and they should. Certainly Jesus' commandment to keep holy the Sabbath is for all people, whether or not you can receive the sacraments. But those who are divorced and not remarried, not living with anybody, they're free to receive confession, communion, all the sacraments, everything.
How many questions were there in the form?
There are probably like 6 or 7 big sections with a lot of little questions underneath, but 6 or 7 big questions about your life and the history of the relationship.
So that you can understand that, and then you come to the question of witnesses. Tell me about that.
Witnesses are people who are going to just corroborate what you're alleging as you write up your petition. Most of it's done by paperwork, sometimes by personal interview as well. But as you present your petition for an annulment, you don't need to contact your ex-spouse. You two are not going to get into a room together.
That's a very interesting thing, because all of a sudden they're going to say, we've had so much pain and so much anger and so much separation. I don't want to get into that again. You don't have to see your spouse.
You don't have to see. It's our job in the marriage tribunal to contact an ex-spouse.
Now, what if the other spouse says, I just completely refuse to have anything to do with this?
Sometimes
is it still possible to have a?
It is still possible. It is. We always like to hear from the ex-spouse to get both sides of a story, but many times the ex-spouse doesn't respond, and so the annulment continues without the ex-spouse, and hence the greater need, importance of witnesses, those who can corroborate what they saw and heard in the marriage, corroborate what the petitioner, what you allege.
All right, I've gone through all of my paperwork. And I could imagine, I've told other people that maybe it could be even in a long afternoon, you might be able to fill out things, to get it done, at least the rough copy done. It isn't something that's going to take years and years to be able to fill out.
Correct, and grammar and spelling don't count. We just need you to fill it out.
Hey, there you go. Now the question comes though, okay, I've done that, then what happens next? I bring it back to the priest in the parish?
Yes, and the priest in the parish, he gathers all the documentation and he sends it off to the diocese, your diocese. And at that point, 1 or 3 judges review the paperwork. We read what comes in, the testimony from witnesses, and also maybe from your ex-spouse. And then a judgment is granted. Affirmative, the marriage is null, you can remarry. Negative, the marriage is valid, you're not free to marry again in the church.
How many, you're sitting here in the Diocese of San Bernardino, how many cases have come to you and right now? Like how many are you dealing with?
We probably do about 140 cases a year. Maybe 10 of those are negative decisions, the rest are affirmative decisions.
Affirmative decisions. And you're saying that maybe on an average 18 months
yes.
To do that after getting things started. And one of the most important things is this witness that you're not going to move into the process on your end until all of the witnesses are present and presenting their case. Is that right?
That's right, at least the majority of them.
Okay.
And we try hard to work with you to make sure you present the best case possible for an annulment.
Okay. We're going to come right back. What we want to do is we want to pray for your marriage, and we want to pray for those that you love that are perhaps going through some tough times. Would you please stay with us? We're going to bring in some prayers of people that have called in and written in. But this is going to be a time of prayer and believing God can even work miracles right now in your life and in your marriage. Please stay tuned. I don't know what's going on in your life right now. I hope that perhaps what we've been speaking about is Christ reaching into your life now and saying that he loves you, he understands you, and he wants to bring healing, and he wants to bring freedom, and he wants to bring new life. I want to pray for you. I want to pray for you in your marriages, and I want to pray for all of these people that have written into us. And please know that we're here to pray for you and to care for you and to bring the blessings of God into your life. Listen to some of these prayers, not necessarily about marriage, but David from Kentucky is praying for himself and that he wants to be a better person. Betty in Colorado, pray for her family. This is what we're talking about. She's from Colorado. Here's Jetty from Wisconsin, that her grandson Andre will find work. Maria, her adult son, whose leg was shattered in a bicycle accident, much pain. Oh, and there's a steel rod right now in his leg. And then here from New York, Rising, all persons affected with severe weather. Oh boy, tough times with weather. Let's pray with this. Lord, we believe that you are a God of love, and that whenever two people come together in marriage, you are the source of that love with the great power that you bring. Bless marriages, Lord, especially those that are going through seasons of great difficulty. Allow them to be able to find the peace and the love and the constancy of your love in their life. We pray, Lord, for those marriages and those people that are involved in broken marriages, where things seem to be a hopeless situation. May they find in this process of annulment a healing, an ability to be able to come closer to you and closer to Christ. We praise and bless you for this great gift. And now may Jesus' love for you always make you smile.